So in part one, we talked about how the Martells are bringing down the Lannisters and how Cersei is about to be exposed as a liar by revealing Sir Robert Strong. And in part two, we talked about how the Martells are trying to screw up Illyrio's plans and steal Dany's dragons. The Martells first screwed up Illyrio's plans to bring Dany to Asshai with Mirri Maz Duur. Mirri ended up hatching dragon eggs rather than stealing them. The Martells then used the Second Sons to screw up Illyrio's plan to team up Dany with Aegon. Dany conquers Meereen and screws up the slave trade, but the Second Sons are unable to steal a dragon before war descends upon them. Now before we start talking about the Martells' third attempt, let's talk about a family called the Ironwoods. Ironwoods? Ironwoods.
House Ironwood are Martell bannermen, and they are the second most powerful house in Dorne. So in the world of Ice and Fire, that means they are the Martells' biggest enemy. Second place houses are the friends that stab you in the back. Or as Jaime puts it, every great lord has unruly bannermen who envy him his place. The Tyrells have the Florents. Hoster Tully had Walder Frey. During the Age of Heroes, Boltons used to flay the Starks and wear their skins as cloaks.
The bad blood between the Martells and the Ironwoods goes back 1,000 years, but let's focus on some recent events. In 3 Blackfire rebellions, the Ironwoods and the Martells fought on opposing sides, with the Ironwoods consistently supporting the Blackfires. Relations remained poor after the wars. Everything went to shit when Oberyn banged Edgar Ironwood's paramour and was challenged to a duel. Edgar got cut, the wound got infected, and everyone blamed Oberyn. Oberyn got exiled and forever known as a dirty, dirty poisoner. Quentyn was then fostered by the Ironwoods and ended up actually really liking the Ironwoods. However, he seems to be the only Martell who does. Which brings us to the mummer's farce that is the Quentyn quest. Now, the Quentyn quest starts out really fishy to begin with. While the rest of the world, specifically the acolytes at the Citadel, are arguing about whether or not Dany is in Qarth or in Meereen, Doran Martell and Anders Ironwood have already put together the Quentyn quest. In fact, they've embedded with them a maester that speaks the language of Slaver's Bay. So it seems that Sorella and Marwyn have been at work with their glass candle. They know Dany is in Meereen, and they know that she's staying put. But the weirdest thing about the Quentyn quest is that he isn't surrounded by any Martells. He can only rely on Ironwoods. Kinda weird considering Oberyn had connections in Lys, connections in Volantis, and connections with the Second Sons. Quentyn's entire quest seems to be led by Garrus Drinkwater, and then by the Windblown, which means really that his entire quest is led by Illyrio. Say, what? That's right, Illyrio and the Golden Company were leading the Quentyn quest to failure. After all, without Dany, the Dornish would have to settle for Aegon. Now I know what you're thinking, where's the proof that the Windblown and the Ironwoods are Illyrio's creatures? Well, let's take it back to the first book when Arya is hiding beneath the dragon skeletons. She overhears Varys say, "This is no longer a game for 2 players." Which means at one time, there were 2 players. Well, we know that the 2 teams that have been conspiring the longest are Team Martell and Team Illyrio, and we can see these 2 players duke it out in different environments, with neither of them really winning, yet. Now we already talked about how the 2 teams duked it out over Dragon Eggs and Meereen, but they also duked it out over Tyrion, a couple times actually. Remember when Tyrion was on the auction block? He was bid on by Zahrina, who is an associate of the Windblown, and by Brown Ben Plum of the Second Sons. Now Tyrion is bought by a third party, Yezzan, but later Yezzan has a party, and who shows up? The Tattered Prince of the Windblown, and Brown Ben Plum of the Second Sons. Now Tyrion went on to join the Second Sons, and the Second Sons in turn bankrupted Tyrion, so we can add that to the list of things the Martells did to bring down House Lannister. But what's interesting is that in the midst of battle, Tyrion begs the Second Sons to switch over to Dany's side. You know what piece of information actually makes Brown Ben Plum switch? Finding out the Windblown switched. So we see that the Second Sons have a rivalry with the Windblown. Now let's go through the Quentyn quest step by step. After leaving Dorne, the gang makes it to Lys and then changes ships. On the way to Volantis, 3 of the companions are killed by pirates. The gang makes it to Volantis, and Quentyn wants to take a ship called Adventure, but Drink convinces them to join the Windblown. The gang fights with the Windblown at Astapor. Drink commands Arch to keep Quentyn well protected. Quentyn thinks they should desert, but Drink convinces Quentyn that they should wait just a little bit longer. Then, lo and behold, out of friggin' nowhere, the Tattered Prince commands the Westerosi specifically to defect. The gang arrives on the worst possible day, the day before Dany's wedding. Hizdahr has given Dany 90 days of peace. Reneging her deal on this day would be political suicide. And so everyone calls Quentyn the prince who came too late. The Tattered Prince even jokes that Quentyn should have deserted earlier. So it seems that the Ironwoods and the Windblown have worked together to make sure that Quentyn fails safely. The gang can go home and the Martells can support Aegon. But then Quentyn wants to steal a dragon. Garrus is like, no, let's not do that. Quentyn is insistent. So Garrus, with incredible ease, goes and finds the Windblown. The gang and the Windblown meet at the bar of Zahrina, who by the way is wearing the skulls of the Golden Company, And together, the gang and the Windblown conspire to steal a dragon. They all make their way down to the dragon pit. Then, out of nowhere, one of the Windblown pulls out a crossbow and tries to kill one of the dragons. Now, from a general Team Illyrio perspective, this move makes sense. Taming a dragon might actually work in courting Daenerys. Killing a dragon, or at least screwing up Quentyn's taming, would stop that. However, the Ironwoods actually like Quentyn and want to keep him safe, so this is a betrayal from the Windblown.
Nonetheless, the mission was a failure for the Martells. Or was it?
Keep in mind, Doran gave Quentyn almost no help and surrounded him with a family that he has a blood feud with. It's certainly no secret that the Ironwoods are longtime Blackfire and Golden Company supporters. Doran should be fully expecting that the Ironwoods would sabotage Quentyn's courting of Dany. So whatever Doran has planned, Quentyn's failure is part of it. It was an expected failure.
In fact, one big tell that Doran expected the plan to fail is that Quentyn brags that the Dornish army has 50,000 men. This is a gross exaggeration, so you can imagine how furious Dany would have been had she actually accepted Quentyn's offer. The stealing of the dragons, though, seems to be Quentyn's invention.
Keep in mind, Quentyn was only even able to try to steal the dragons because Dany randomly showed him how to get to the dragon pit. It's hard to believe that Doran, a cautious man, would want his son to go and risk his life like that. And if his dragon dreams were caused by a person like Sorella or Marwyn, they clearly wanted to instill fear in him.
Perhaps to give up his risky plan.
So it seems that Doran wants to team up with Aegon, or at least wants to appear that way.
This might be complicated by the fact that Quentyn actually succeeded in stealing a dragon. That's right, Quentyn is totally alive. How do we know? Because his friends are lying about him being dead. After the dragons escape, Barristan arrests Arch and Drink and places them in a cell. Let's keep in mind that Arch is the honest, honorable one, while Drink is the mummer. In fact, Barristan even calls him False Coin. Barristan lets the two know that Quentyn has finally died of his burns. Drink then punches a wall in grief and claims everything is Daenerys' fault. But that's weird. Drink just lost his cool. Drink never loses his cool. In fact, earlier in the story, 3 of their friends died and Drink showed no grief for them. Not to mention, Quentyn had been dying 3 days. Was Drink hoping that he might actually pull through? Barristan then asks what happened when they tried to take the dragons, which is actually what we want to know too because the chapter cuts off in the middle of the action. Drink and Arch then exchange a look. Drink rewinds to the beginning of the story and starts outlining the plan. Arch then jumps in with very specific but irrelevant details about chains, Quentyn's reaction, and how wild the dragons were. Right when we get to the part of the story that's mysterious, Arch pauses and is uncomfortable. Drink jumps in, Says, and the Windblown blew away, essentially ending the tale.
That's the end of the story? I have so many questions. Why didn't Quentyn explode and his eyes pop? Dragonfire is like the hottest thing ever. How did Arch put Quentyn out? Why did the Windblown take off at that moment? Why not when the first man died? How did the panicked Windblown find their way out of the maze? When did the dragons leave? Why weren't Drink and Arch eaten? But most importantly, why was Drink standing over Quentyn with a sword? I mean, the Windblown and the dragons are gone, and Drink didn't want to fight the brazen beasts, so who's the sword for? Is it for that burned person on the ground there? Wait, isn't that Quentyn? Or is it? How can one possibly identify a body that's been burned so thoroughly? Why couldn't the person on the ground be one of the Windblown, or the Tattered Prince himself?
In fact, A Dance with Dragons ends and begins with this conundrum. Our story opens with peasants wanting restitution for burnt livestock. Daenerys tells us, men make fires, burnt bones prove nothing. And Missandei says something weird as well. She says Quentyn smiles.
Well, that's weird, because smiles had never come easy for Quentyn Martell.
Successful or not, the Martells have even more scheming, and we'll talk about that in part 4.